When I read Cupcakes and Courage, one of the things I was struck by was the fact the Secretary of State needs to be above the fray of the normal electoral partisan process that happens at the State House. Is this a good thing for the Secretary of State to sit on this highly partisan apportionment board?
I think it's something that could be rethought. I mean, the secretary could play a ministerial role with the board and already does, but this is really more of a political reason why, because at the time of the 2008 election, the Republicans were assuming that I was going to run for re-election in 2010. So I remember in the beginning of 2008 thinking, especially in working with the legislature for some changes that I needed, especially for Cuyahoga County, thinking they certainly won't jimmy with the system to the point where it would hurt their own candidates. And as the year progressed, it was worse and worse and worse to the point that I felt that they didn't care whether they hurt their own candidates or not. And this could be either party. I'm not just trying to dump on the Republican Party. But I guess the point is that because they were looking for reasons to attack me in a year when it would be decided who would be sitting on the apportionment board, they really made some pretty nasty attempts to really skew and mess with the election. And if I hadn't been as stalwart and stubborn as I had been, I mean, there are things I could have caved on politically that I just knew that I couldn't.
I know that not every state has an elected Secretary of State. Florida, for example, abolished theirs a few years ago after their election kerfluffle. Should the Secretary of State's office move to a more administrative status rather than an elective office?
This issue came up during the 2008 election. We had some of the editorial boards of the paper saying, if we did this like Wisconsin, where we have a state election board and there's just an attorney that advises the election board. But I watched what happened when the whole this was the process of the statewide voter database and whether or not it could be used as a tool to disenfranchise people or push them into provisional ballots. And you almost need that elected official, number one, so that the people of the state can say, we put them there, we can take them out, we don't like the way that they're running the game, which is the game of elections, as a referee. And also when that entity that's running the elections is being attacked politically by one side or another. I mean, think about a sports game where people don't like the call of the referee and they start razzing the ref. Well, it's nice to have a political party to stand behind you, to be able to be sort of the third party validator to push back so that you can focus on doing what everybody's depending upon you to do, which is to run a good, clean election that people can trust.
You and I started our first discussion about public policy involving a little known fact that the Secretary of State's office is involved with data gathering. What is the role of the Secretary of State for data gathering?
Yes, there's actually a statute that says that the Secretary of State is to gather information from all of the state offices, and there's even a criminal fine or a quasi-criminal, like a penalty, if a state agency doesn't turn that information over to the Secretary of State. See, I used to tell people, if you're trying to figure out what the Secretary of State does, think of the PTA. You have a corresponding secretary and you have a recording secretary. So the recording side is actually the business services. This is where you go to get your information. This is where you can find data. The corresponding side is the one that does the outreach that says, here's how you participate with our organization, and that is running the elections. So it's unfortunate that Secretary Husted decided to shut down the Better Lives, Better Ohio statewide database because it was a phenomenal online research tool for reporters, for students, for researchers, for anyone who wanted to know anything from how much exposed rock do we have in Crawford County to how many women in Athens County on Medicaid get mammograms, to any kind of school statistic that you could want to find, to actually the use of libraries county by county. It's hopefully the data is still there someplace, and hopefully some office holder would want to pick that up because it could be used to measure the efficacy of our policy and our progress, and perhaps that's the reason why those in power don't want it out there, because they're afraid of what it's going to show.
In your book, Cupcakes and Courage, you spend a lot of time talking about the role of women. You had a tremendous cadre of women who were ferociously dedicated to you, helping you proceed up the political food chain. In the past 25 years, the Republican Party has had tremendous luck promoting women to statewide offices. Why hasn't the Democratic Party had the same luck?
I think there's a mentality among some party leadership that if we have one African American on the ticket and one woman on the ticket, that's enough. Because if the core of the party leadership is still largely controlled by people who feel comfortable with one another because they're like one another, which is generally white men, then and the issue is control, which so much it is with the political party, then if you have someone who's not like you, they're less predictable, less controllable, and then you're a little bit off your game if you're allowing them into the fold. If you want everyone to stay in line, which political parties are supposed to be disciplined. So it's almost in some ways antithetical to the traditional role of political parties. But if you want to look at other models, I mean, there are other countries where they actually have quotas, and even in the Ohio Democratic Party, they have quotas. But when it comes to the actual decision-making control, it's not collaborative.